These museums refused to display these cursed Viking artifacts, and for good reason. The Beardmore Relics, the artifacts that destroyed careers and were pulled off display for decades. If a Viking sword could ruin a man's life, ignite an international scandal, and vanish from museum displays for more than 30 years, it would be the Beardmore Relics. And the craziest part, the Royal Ontario Museum actually displayed them until everything connected to them turned toxic. Literally, some staff swore the items brought nothing but misfortune into the building. In 1936, a Canadian prospector named James Dodd walked into the ROM, claiming he had discovered a cache of Viking artifacts, a sword, an axe head, a spear, and fragments of chainmail, now in the remote wilderness near Beardmore, Ontario. If true, this would radically rewrite North American history. It would mean Vikings explored deep into Canada, far beyond Newfoundland, centuries before Columbus. The museum actually bought the story instantly. They didn't just display the relics, they celebrated them. They were proof, tangible, dramatic proof of Norse, presence in the Canadian interior. Now, problems began immediately. Museum staff reported bizarre accidents around the display. The glass case broke multiple times with no impact. Equipment malfunctioned whenever the relics were being moved. A researcher even claimed the sword fell off its mount overnight despite being bolted in. Internal memos described the collection as troublesome and persistently unsettling, but the real disaster came in 1956. A witness came forward. He said Dodd had lied. The relics weren't unearthed in the wilderness. He had bought them from a Norwegian immigrant years earlier. The entire discovery was a hoax. Suddenly, the ROM wasn't dealing with mysterious accidents, they were dealing with humiliation. Major newspaper headlines mocked the museum, careers were destroyed, director Charles Curley's reputation was shredded beyond repair, and then the museum did something it had never done before. They pulled the artifacts off display and locked them away. For decades, the ROM refused to let them be public again, not for research, not for exhibition, and definitely not for education. They refused because the artifacts had become cursed in a different way. Not supernaturally, but historically. They were a symbol of deception, controversy, embarrassment, and institutional failure. Even today, the Beardmore relics exist, but you won't find them proudly displayed in the museum. They are a cautionary tale museums don't like to talk about and often quietly keep out of sight. The Kensington Runestone, the artifact experts call too dangerous to display as fact. Imagine finding a 200-pound stone covered in mysterious Viking runes in the middle of American farmland, and then watching the academic world implode over whether it's real. Then imagine museums refusing to display it as genuine because doing so would ignite chaos in the historical community. That's the nightmare surrounding the Kensington Runestone. In 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman uncovered a large stone slab tangled in the roots of a poplar tree in Minnesota. Carved into the surface was a chilling message written in Norse runes, a message describing a deadly Viking expedition in 1362 where 10 men were unalived. Now, if authentic, this would rewrite the known history of Viking exploration in North America. But almost immediately, scholars accused the stone of being a hoax. Linguists argued, the ruins were too modern. Historians insisted, the described events made no sense. Archaeologists said it was impossible, yet the stone refused to go away. Every time it resurfaced in a museum, the same thing happened. Audiences flocked to see it, and outraged academics publicly attacked the institution. The Smithsonian famously refused to display it. University museums rejected requests to show it. Even Scandinavian heritage organizations distanced themselves. Why? Well, because if a museum even implied the stone was real, they would be accused of promoting pseudoscience and rewriting history for tourism dollars. So here's the twist. In the last 20 years, several linguists and geologists have actually supported parts of its authenticity, including geological weathering on the rune cuts that seems older than any known hoax's lifetime, basically. The debate is so explosive that most major museums refuse to touch it, not because the stone is cursed, but because the conversation around it is. It destroys reputations, it splits communities, it causes bitter academic feuds that get so intense, curators avoid it entirely. Today, the Kensington Runestone sits in a small regional museum, the only place willing to handle the political fallout, but major museums, they refuse to display it to this day. The Maine Penny, the artifact that Smithsonians won't display because it shouldn't exist. If there's one Viking artifact American museums treat like radioactive waste, it's the Maine Penny, a real 11th century Norse silver coin found in the United States in a place Vikings were never supposed to be. The coin was discovered in 1957 by a volunteer digger at an archaeological site in Maine known as the Goddard Site. At first, no one realized what it was, but when experts examined it, they were stunned. It was a genuine Norwegian Norwegian coin minted between 1065 and 1093. That meant only one thing: Vikings had traveled all the way to coastal Maine, but instead of celebrating what should have been one of the most groundbreaking archaeological discoveries in North American history, museums panicked. The Smithsonian, which owns the coin, has consistently refused to display it prominently. For decades it was hidden in storage and only shown by special request. Even now, it is rarely displayed, and when it is, curators attach heavy disclaimers. Why? Well, because the Maine Penny terrifies the academic establishment. If real, it means Vikings had trade routes, travel networks, or direct contact with indigenous groups spanning far beyond the documented settlement at Lance aux Meadows. It suggests layers of history that standard narrative simply does not account for, and that's where the curse begins. Anyone who publicly supports the coin's authenticity is mocked, attacked, or written off as fringe. Museums know this. Exhibiting the coin invites controversy, demands for curriculum changes, and vicious public debates. Multiple archaeologists who publicly backed the coin reported losing grants, facing institutional pushback, or being labeled unreliable. So museums chose the safest option, which is just keep the coin at a site, because the Maine Penny doesn't just challenge history, it challenges the power structures that decide which history actually counts. The Oseberg ship burial, the Viking artifact so sacred, some museums refuse to display the originals. Now, the Oseberg ship is one of the most breathtaking Viking discoveries ever made, but what most people don't know is that many of the artifacts found inside were considered so spiritually charged, so culturally sensitive, and in some cases so potentially cursed that Norway spent decades refusing to display them. And the reason is haunting. The burial belonged to two high-status women, possibly priestesses, sorceresses, or valor, women believed in Viking culture to hold supernatural powers. Now, when archaeologists opened the burial mound in 1904, they found carved wagon pieces, beautifully decorated sleds, animal remains, preserved textiles, and a serpent-headed carving that terrified some workers. One worker said the serpent head had an expression like it was watching us. Others reported getting sick after handling certain, carved wooden objects. One artifact, a carved animal head, was placed into storage after multiple conservators said they felt dread after touching it. But the biggest problem was spiritual, not paranormal. In Norse culture, burial items belonging to high priestesses were believed to contain spiritual energy, especially objects used in ritual magic. Now, these items weren't meant to be touched, let alone displayed. By the mid-20th century, Norway's museums quietly adopted a rule. Many Oseberg artifacts would only be displayed as replicas. The originals were kept locked away because they were too fragile, they were too sacred, they were too spiritually charged. And conservators repeatedly reported accidents, chemical breakdowns, and just really strange deterioration that didn't affect, similar Viking artifacts. Even today, the most powerful items, especially the carved animal heads, are kept hidden except for extremely rare exhibitions. There's no official mention of a curse, but there doesn't have to be. When an entire category of objects is treated like touching them risks something you can't explain, that speaks for itself. The Lewis Chessmen, the haunted Viking chess set museums locked away. If you think a chess set can't be haunted, you've never heard the stories whispered about the Lewis Chessmen, one of the most iconic Viking-era artifacts ever discovered. Carved from walrus ivory and dating back to the 12th century, these eerie little figures were found buried on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland in 1831. But the discovery wasn't peaceful. The man who found them reportedly had nightmares for weeks. Local folklore says, the pieces moved in the night and brought bad luck to whoever kept them for too long. When the artifacts were acquired by British museums, strange stories didn't stop. A museum archive record mentions staff hearing, clattering inside locked display cases. Another described the knights carved with bulging eyes and biting their shields as disturbing to work with. And the British Museum displayed most of the pieces, but here's the part most people don't know. Several of the pieces were originally kept hidden because curators thought the public would be unsettled by them. Even stranger, for over a century, a smaller group of the chessmen were kept out of sight entirely by the National Museum of Scotland due to ongoing debates about their ownership, their origins, and the persistent folklore attached to them. One former curator claimed he refused to work late in the storage room that held the chessmen because he heard noises like something tapping inside the drawer. Were the pieces cursed, haunted, or just unsettlingly lifelike? Whatever the truth is, museums kept portions of the set locked away for a long time, and even today, some of the most notorious pieces are not always on public display, which only makes them more mysterious. mysterious and more legendary. Which Viking artifact intrigued you the most? Let me know. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Ashley. I'll see you next time. Some videos aren't meant to be watched, but I'm diving into real cases of haunted footage that is so infamous that paranormal investigators and skeptical experts have warned the public to stay away. Let's talk about the Seacliff Asylum basement tape, the footage that should have never been made public. In 1999, a contractor working at the abandoned Seacliff Lunatic Asylum in New Zealand captured what was meant to be routine documentation of water damage. Instead, he filmed what experts have called one of the most chilling, unexplained encounters ever recorded. The man walks through the basement, narrating the smell of mold, the peeling paint, until the camera glitches hard, drops out for a second, then comes back with a figure standing at the end of the corridor. You can't see a face, only a silhouette. The contractor calls out, thinking it's a trespasser, but the figure does not move, it just tilts its head. And then, this part made even veteran ghost hunters nauseous. The shape appears behind him in the next frame without ever walking. The contractor screams, the camera hits the floor, and the recording ends. When the footage leaked online years later, viewers reported